Well, in this short lecture, we're going to discuss the promotional mix. And we've discussed previously how the marketing mix, commonly referred to as the 4 Ps, essentially works. And we know that it's a strategy, of course, in different areas that companies and businesses need to consider as a way of positioning themselves to the extent that they want to be positioned in the minds of consumers. And the promotional piece is really one part of the 4 Ps. And so specifically, we're going to discuss how the company utilizes its promotions as a way of kind of bettering its overall position in the market. And so the promotional mix, we know, consists of how a company communicates with its audience and with its consumers. And so there's a number of different things that companies can leverage as a way of presenting itself in a certain light, of course, but also highlighting certain features and certain benefits of the different products and services that it produces. And so there are 4 elements of the promotional mix, and companies can use these to varying degrees as a way of enhancing their overall, at least how they're perceived in the particular market. Now remember, with all marketing aspects, the ultimate goal is to try and affect consumer purchase behavior. So ultimately, we are trying to get people to purchase our products and services or more of them. Some things just take longer than others. And so as we're reviewing the promotional mix, keep that in mind. Some of these elements may be more to inform people or to create a need, if you will, although some are more short-term and are designed to affect purchase behavior almost immediately from what we'll see. So let's highlight some of these different components here, and then we'll discuss them one by one. Now, the first element of the promotional mix, and by and large the most common one, simply because we see it day in and day out, is advertising. In advertising, we often have a lot of experience and exposure to, simply because it is so visible. You know, there isn't generally a moment during the day that we are not being advertised to in some way, shape, or form, whether it's product placement in television or movies, whether it's radio advertisements, whether it's advertisements on the internet, whether it's advertisements on television. You know, generally the only time that we are not being advertised to is when we're sleeping. Outside of that, you see a large number of advertisements geared towards trying to get us to purchase certain things. And so first off, how do we define advertising? There's a couple of components. Advertising is paid and non-personal communication at which an identified sponsor informs an audience about a product. And so paid, non-personal, at which an identified sponsor is informing an audience about a product. And so you might wonder, okay, what are these 2 elements that I have here? I wrote down paid and non-personal, and why are those important? Well, the first thing is advertising is delineated between such things as publicity or public relations because it is paid, meaning that a company is going to run an advertising campaign and it will essentially pay another company to run its particular advertisements or pay a radio station to run an audio kind of advertisement, if you will, or pay a particular company who owns a website to show a banner ad or something similar. And so there is a paid element, so this is company sponsored, of course. But it's also non-personal. And what is meant by non-personal is you don't have the ability to interact with the ad. And by interact, what I mean is in some advertisements, particularly when we get to some of the others, is that you have the ability to tailor the message to the person individually. With advertisements, they're generally created for a mass audience, for a large number of people. And so by advertising, let's say on the Super Bowl, maybe you're paying $2.7 or $3.1 million for a 30-second spot, which is roughly what they go for nowadays. But if you divide that ultimately by the reach or the number of people that you are advertising to, on a per-person basis, it's very, very small. It's actually pretty cost-effective, but you have to be a larger corporation to have that type of budget for your marketing department. Now, it isn't tailored, though, to everyone that's watching, because depending upon how someone interacts with the advertisement, I can't necessarily change the message to meet the needs of that person. And so advertising generally is meant to inform people about certain products or services to make it so that people recognize my brand because they see it more often. And generally, you see the companies that run advertisements, particularly during the Super Bowl, are usually well-known companies that are simply trying to make sure that their brands stay relevant and they stay up in front and they have a good brand image, if you will. So obviously, a lot of companies would not necessarily advertise during the Super Bowl simply because of the initial cost, even though on a per-person basis, it might actually be lower in cost than some of the other forms of promotion that I'm actually going to go over here. Now, there are a number of different choices of media, of course, and they all have different costs. So I went over, obviously, the aspect of television advertising and how that can employ a cost. But you can go through a number of different other advertisements, whether they're print, like magazines or newspapers, whether it's online advertising. There's a number of different opportunities that you have to actually go ahead and advertise this way. Now, the next form of promotion is what we call personal selling. And personal selling, although it's a form of promotion, operates in a very different way than advertising. And personal selling involves a salesperson specifically that will actually go ahead and communicate one-on-one with potential customers. And so you have one-on-one communication. And this is both positive and negative. If we talk about effectiveness of this particular method, you can argue that this is probably one of the more effective ways of promoting your particular products and services. It is by far the oldest, as well as the most expensive form of sales. And the reason for that is you're paying for cost on a one-on-one basis. And that has certain advantages, but it also has certain disadvantages. So let's look at the advantages first. The first of which is that you have the ability to tailor your message to the person who's actually receiving it. And you can look at things like nonverbal communication. You can assess their needs. You can ask them questions based upon what are their needs, and then essentially offer them different products or services that fit those particular needs. And so by and large, it is probably the most effective form of promotion, but it is very expensive because you're typically paying for the time of one person and your reach is very small. You know, what we do is when we analyze promotional methods, you consider two variables. You're looking at reach, but you're also looking at effectiveness. And ultimately, the larger your reach, generally the less effective your promotional method is because you can't necessarily tailor it to a few people since you're reaching a large audience. Whereas in personal selling, your reach is very small, right? You're reaching maybe 1, 2, 3, maybe a handful of people at the very most. And then ultimately, though, you can tailor your message to those particular individuals. And so we can do what we call qualify people and make sure that they fit the characteristics of people that would have a need for our product or service, and then ultimately develop my pitch, so to speak, in line with ultimately their characteristics and what their needs and desires are. So on a total basis, if you were to look at just the expenditures, maybe personal selling will be less than advertising, but if you go on a per person basis, then personal selling generally is more expensive than simply your advertising and different things of that nature. All right, the next form of promotion is what we call sales promotion. And sales promotion, you're all probably very familiar to. You may not have heard the terminology before, but you've definitely experienced what sales promotion is. And sales promotion involves what we call short-term promotional activities. And what these short-term promotional activities are designed to do is they're designed to encourage an immediate purchase. And that's a very, very important part of this particular method, because we mentioned that there are some advertising methods that are more long-term, that are meant really to inform and may not affect anything in the immediate future. But sales promotion is designed to ultimately have an immediate impact right now. And so some common things for promotional or sales promotional methods include things like coupons, where you're offering the buyer a certain discount, if you will, for purchasing a particular product. You may do things called like offer premiums, which are offering free or reduced price items that are meant to accompany a particular purchase. And so it's very common, for example, the day after Thanksgiving sales. Typically, if you purchase product XYZ, you might get something for free. And usually that could be something of value or something different, obviously. But it's meant to obviously encourage you to make a immediate purchase now. Buy one, get one free, buy two, get one free. Those are all sales promotional methods. And they're designed and very effective for buyers that are in that stage of the consumer decision making or buying process where they're at a point where they want to make a purchase. And it can be, ultimately, they could be thinking about a number of different products that meet that particular need. And the sales promotional method and that form of promotion may serve to have them purchase one product over another. If everything is fairly constant, things are fairly similar, then ultimately the price or the discount or the premium that I get along with that purchase might be enough to deter me from purchasing a product from one company and purchasing it with another. Now, the last form of promotion is what we call publicity and public relations. And I'm going to abbreviate that simply as PR for public relations. And this takes the form of a couple of different things. First off, let's go into what publicity is. Publicity is information about a company, a product, or an event that is simply transmitted by the general mass media as a way of attracting public attention. And so publicity specifically is not controlled by the company. And this can be either good or bad. Right? Publicity, we know, is free because it's produced and provided by the mass media. And so the news outlets in different places will run different events highlighting certain stories, highlighting certain businesses. The unfortunate thing, though, although it is free, you can't necessarily control publicity. You don't have the ability to affect or change what that news outlet or what the media will essentially say about you. And that essentially could be very, very problematic. We've heard of the term that, well, no press is essentially bad press. And although if you're trying to raise awareness about yourself, then that might be true. But to an extent, you can certainly argue that you don't want negative things being said about you or your company, because ultimately that could hurt the perception that people have of you. Just take, for example, within the last several years, Taco Bell had the huge issue where there was an allegation that the meat that they used wasn't real beef and it was some other form of, kind of a combination of different things, if you will. And obviously that wasn't something that was produced by the company, because they wouldn't say something that would necessarily affect them negatively. And they had to respond to that, of course. And that's what you'll find is publicity, although it can be positive, it can be negative as well. And it's important that a company responds to those allegations quickly, much as Taco Bell did. They ran a number of different advertisements saying that those were incorrect. They ran different advertisements saying that studies had been done that prove it's such and such percentage of ground beef or whatever the case was. I don't remember the exact specifics. But they responded to that because publicity that is negative, that does not go noticed or it's not responded to, people generally accept as true if no one says anything to nullify that or to negate that potential issue there. And so that presents not only opportunities, but also presents some significant threats as well. Now, with regards to public relations is influenced by the company. And so here we have the ability to change ultimately what the perception is about our particular company. And so we know that public relations are company influenced, and the purpose is twofold. The first purpose is to build goodwill with the public. And so we want the public to view us as favorable, of course. We definitely want them to perceive us as a socially conscious and environmentally conscious company that does good, positive things and isn't in it simply just for monetary gain. And so that's important. And so companies have public relations departments that are in charge of drafting press releases and sending those to different outlets and are designed to raise awareness about all of the good things that companies do. Just look at websites for a lot of companies. Typically they have a public relations section or an about section, and it's just designed to highlight all of the positive contributions that companies are making. And so once again, we're building goodwill because we as consumers generally want to purchase products from businesses that we somewhat line up with from an ethical standpoint, but we also see that they are giving back to the community and generally having a positive impact. Now, the second event that I referenced that public relations is designed to do is deal with unfavorable events. And there obviously comes a time when bad things take place. And public relations is designed to deal with those maybe unforeseen and unfavorable events. So for example, we know that in the last several years, British Petroleum, commonly referred to as BP, had the Deepwater Horizon disaster where an explosion took place on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, which is just outside of the Gulf, of course. And then it obviously subsequently caused that Deepwater Horizon oil rig to sink, severing connection with the actual pumps and causing a large, significant number of oil to be pumped into the Gulf, which caused just devastation in that particular area. You have people like fishermen who obviously need the Gulf to provide for their families and things, and they weren't in positions to do so. You had restaurants that were in that area that obviously suffered significantly. And so BP, obviously their public relations department, was in charge of dealing with a very unfavorable event. And so they ran different advertisements on television, which typically showcased employees that were from that particular area, and were talking about how they were present and how they were dealing with it, and they were committed to that particular area. They were highlighting all of the money they've donated to compensate people that were affected negatively by this particular event. And so they went through a lot of public relations in an attempt to try and not only deal with the unfavorable event, but also build some goodwill so that ultimately consumers viewed them as someone who was, they were responsible for the event, but that they weren't necessarily just leaving it for someone else to handle. They were proactive and they were going out there and trying to make changes. Now, this promotional mix, like I said, encompasses the 4 areas of advertising, personal selling, sales promotion, and publicity and public relations, And companies will use these together in unison as a way of highlighting certain things. And companies don't have to use all of them per se. You don't necessarily need to use personal selling. Maybe that isn't something that you want to specialize in, and it obviously represents a very significant cost because it is more expensive on a per-person basis. But companies can utilize each of these in varying degrees as a way ultimately of promoting and communicating information about their products and services to consumers. And so typically we don't resort to simply just one or the other. Usually we use a number of these, obviously, to enhance our promotional effectiveness, if you will, but these are some of the elements that ultimately you'll see companies key in on. And certain benefits of the different products and services that it produces. And so there are 4 elements of the promotional mix, and companies can use these to varying degrees as a way of enhancing their overall, at least how they're perceived in the particular market. Now remember, with all marketing aspects, the ultimate goal is to try and affect consumer purchase behavior. So ultimately we are trying to get people to purchase our products and services. The promotional mix, and by and large the most common one, simply because we see it day in and day out, is advertising. In advertising we often have a lot of experience and exposure to, simply because it is so visible. There isn't generally a moment during the day that we are not being advertised to in some way, shape, or form, whether it's product placement in television or movies, whether it's or more of them. Some things just take longer than others. And so as we're reviewing the promotional mix, keep that in mind. Some of these elements may be more to inform people or to create a need, if you will, although some are more short-term and are designed to affect purchase behavior almost immediately from what we'll see. So let's highlight some of these different components here, and then we'll discuss them one by one. Now, the first element I'm going to discuss how the company utilizes its promotions as a way of kind of bettering its overall position in the market. And so the promotional mix, we know, consists of how a company communicates with its audience and with its consumers. And so there's a number of different things that companies can leverage as a way of presenting itself in a certain light, of course, but also highlighting certain features. Well, in this short lecture, we're going to discuss the promotional mix. And we've discussed previously how the marketing mix, commonly referred to as the 4 Ps, essentially works. And we know that it's a strategy, of course, in different areas that companies and businesses need to consider as a way of positioning themselves to the extent that they want to be positioned in the minds of consumers. And the promotional piece is really one part of the 4 Ps. And so specifically, we're going